Welcome into the PFF NFL Daily. Today, giving some love to those many teams, a quarter of the league, that do not have a first round pick. We're going to highlight at least a couple of them and give you some best case scenarios because, Sam, we just don't mock draft for teams that don't have first round picks, at least most mock drafts. You get some multi round mocks and all that stuff, but all the teams that traded out usually get ignored. Our friend Ben Lindsay wrote an article over at pff.com. He highlighted some of his best suggestions, but let's pick a couple teams that do not have first round picks and give them some best case scenarios here, Sam.
Yeah, and this is fun because immediately you're going to have people going, well, that would never happen, right? Because obviously nobody ever slides in a draft relative to the mock drafts, the things you saw beforehand. So look, some of this stuff is going to seem a little bit optimistic because it's best case scenario. So the first one up, I think, is a team we were talking about before, the Chicago Bears. What do they do to help Justin Fields? Well, they hope to get lucky with their pick at number 39 overall. Ben Lindsay has them grabbing Central Michigan tackle Bernhard Raimann, hoping he's still on the board at the time that pick rolls around. Honestly, I think the Raimann or Trevor Penning, if they hope one of those guys falls, are also one of those wide receivers, the guys on the fringe of the first round, the bottom of the first round type of players, Sky Moore, George Pickens, those types of players, if they're still around by the time they pick. One of those two spots, I think, would be fantastic if they got value there.
I honestly think that's a similar answer for our next team, though, the Indianapolis Colts, just 3 picks later at number 42. So you're talking about from a Bears perspective, what do they need? Well, they haven't done a whole lot in free agency. So if the Bears do get any sort of offensive help along the offensive line or as far as playmakers go, absolutely. As now the Colts, 3 picks later, they don't have a first rounder because of the Carson Wentz trade last year, but they could still use extra playmakers on the outside. Michael Pittman emerged last year. Still need more out there for the Colts. And Matt Ryan, the new quarterback there. But also left tackle is now a question mark for the Indianapolis Colts. Last year's 1-year flyer on Eric Fisher, that's over. The Colts didn't attack left tackle in the first round last year, and so that's potentially an issue. So if Raimann or Penning falls, same scenario, but if they fall all the way to 42, that'd be great. But I think the way Ben highlights in his article, the two guys you mentioned, George Pickens, Sky Moore, I would love those guys fitting in to that Colts offensive system.
Yeah, the tackle thing in particular, I think there's a significant drop off after those guys. So if you're in the market like Chicago, like Indianapolis, potentially for a starting tackle with that first pick, with your second rounder, you really need one of those guys to fall because otherwise you are shoehorning in a prospect that is ranked much lower on draft boards. Like our next tackle available after Trevor Penning is all the way down, potentially out, well outside the top 50 on PFF's big board. That's starting to get tricky. You know, when you're talking about a potentially outside of the top 50 player coming in starting day one at an important position like tackle, that's not exactly setting your quarterback up for success, or the tackle for that matter.
Yeah, so love the offense. You know, those two options for maybe the Bears and the Colts in that 39 to 42 range where both teams are picking. The Cleveland Browns are the next team that don't have a first-round pick that will pick at 44, their first pick in that second round there. Ben highlights that they could use anybody along the defensive line. I completely agree. I think when you came into this offseason with the Browns, before you knew they were going to make the Deshaun Watson move, you were looking at receiver, you're looking at the defensive line. I don't think you have to hope for a best-case scenario here. I think you're going to get a top 30 type of player, probably on their own board, but top 40 at least from PFF's board, whether it's a Nick Benito, the edge rusher out of Oklahoma, Boye Mafe, the edge rusher out of Minnesota. If they go interior, Travis Jones from UConn. And then there's several other edge defenders that still rank in the PFF top 50. I do think the Browns at least get a starter in the second round because it is a deep defensive line class.
Yeah, honestly, Travis Jones, I think, would end up being an absolute home run pick for them if he fell that far. Travis Jones, I think there should be a bigger conversation about comparing Travis Jones to Jordan Davis, right? Jordan Davis, the man mountain, 6'7", 340 pounds, blew up the combine, incredible numbers. The hype's out of control. We're talking about him as maybe in the top 10 now. Travis Jones might have tape that's every bit as good. He certainly has grades that are as good, if not better, albeit at a lower level of competition, etc. But Jones offers a little bit more as a pass rusher. He seems to be every bit as good a run defender as Jordan Davis. Again, the level of competition is slightly different, so it's not, I'm not saying one is as good as the other, But I'm saying that should be a conversation that's being had more. And if the Browns were able to snag him with that pick that they have coming up, rather than some other team taking Jordan Davis, with potentially a top 10 pick, top 15 pick, that I think represents an absolute steal, a guy that can come in, solidify the middle of that defensive line.
Let's highlight the 49ers at pick 61 in a minute here. But right now, you can get 50% off a PFF Elite annual subscription if you use the promo code DRAFT50. With 365 days of Elite, you can get all of PFF's locked article content, the NFL Draft Guide, 250 plus, 3-page scouting profiles, completely unlocked mock draft simulator, data and grades for the entire 2021 and upcoming 2022 season. It's promo code DRAFT50 for 50% off a PFF Elite annual subscription. Plus, PFF is launching Hutch, a 4-part podcast series with number 1 overall NFL draft prospect Aiden Hutchinson. It's April 13th. The show includes interviews with Jim Harbaugh, current and former Michigan players, key members of Aiden's family, media members, and draft analysts. Check out Hutch on April 13th. Yeah, so at pick 61 with the 49ers, Ben highlights that guy again, Nick Benito, a guy with a pass rush win rate better than anybody else in the class, the Oklahoma edge. Now, it's not always fair because a lot of times you have the hybrid defenders who, they drop into coverage a little bit. Pass rush win rate, it's not always the same across the board. But Benito, really good burst to the edge, has a good counter move to get inside. That's how you win. It's similar to a guy like Josh Uche from Michigan a couple years ago who had that high pass rush win rate, and that's actually translated at the NFL level. Could be a nice fit for the Niners if they can get him at 61.
Yeah, I think edge rusher would be a good pick. I also think they would really love an interior offensive lineman that is value to be at that spot. So I think it's unlikely, very unlikely, in fact, that a guy like Zion Johnson falls that far, but maybe somebody like Kenyon Green from Texas A&M does start to slide. He's been dropped a lot on PFF's board. And there's other interior offensive linemen. They need someone to replace Laken Tomlinson. The interior generally of that offensive line is a little bit weaker than it's been in the past. And that's a spot, if they're going to make a quarterback transition, or even if they're not, that they definitely they can't let that start to disintegrate. They need that offensive line to stay in a good spot.
All right, I'm going to open this up, make it open-ended for the rest of the teams that don't have first-round picks. You've got the Broncos who don't pick first, and their first pick is number 64. Las Vegas Raiders are at 86. Miami Dolphins are at 102. And then finally, the Los Angeles Rams, their first pick is at 104. That's what you get for winning the Super Bowl. Is there any particular player or strategy among those teams? And obviously, all these teams are picking this low because they either just got impact players, right? They got Russell Wilson or Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill or Von Miller or whatever it was. Is there a particular team you want to highlight out of that group as far as what they should do here without their first round pick?
I think the Raiders still need serious offensive line help. So the Raiders might have to just take the approach of whatever picks we have in this draft, let's start firing at the offensive line and hope we hit on something, because, guys like Alex Leatherwood, their top pick from a year ago, he was an absolute train wreck at right tackle, and then a slightly smaller train wreck, a car wreck maybe, at right guard, which is still a bad accident. And a real reach from playing that badly to expecting him to be a quality starter next year. And now you're assembling this team to try and compete in that, murderer's row of a division, let alone the AFC at large. You need to make sure that your offensive line is not bad enough that, like, everything you've already done is immediately, invalidated or counteracted by the fact that your line just isn't good enough.
Yeah, I was going to go a similar route, talking about maybe the Dolphins and maybe the Rams. I like that Ben highlighted a very specific center for the Dolphins. It's Kentucky center Luke Fortner, who did play 3 different positions at Kentucky, had an 85 grade last year at center. That's like the last piece of the puzzle maybe for this Dolphins offensive line overhaul. If you can steal a starter at pick 102, that'd be great. I also think the Rams, starting at pick 104, a strategy that they employed a couple years ago was to pick a whole bunch of mid-tier or mid-round offensive line prospects, and they've hit on a couple of them, right? They've found a couple starters with mid-round offensive linemen, and I think that's a big part of how the Rams have been able to build their team and maybe spend a little bit more elsewhere, because they're stealing starters. And I do think, Dylan Parham from Memphis at guard could be a guy, or Abraham Lucas, if you want to add tackle depth, from Washington State. Those players could be available in that third round range, and just a place for the Rams to consider. Ben highlights defensive line. I think offensive line, would be a good strategy to kind of try to steal some starters again, like they did a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a lot like free agency. We were talking about there's a lot of teams need to go into free agency and start hammering away at their offensive line. And it doesn't have to be with the superstars, with guys like Brandon Scherf. It's at some of these lower level starters, guys that are just average or below average or above average, somewhere in the middle. Just get you back toward average in the offensive line. I think there's a few teams left over that didn't quite do a good enough job there that need to do the same thing in the draft and just start throwing picks at these mid to low round guys, and hope that one or two of them sticks and they're able to upgrade out one or two spots in that offensive line and just get closer to that average group.
It's a record-setting year with 8 teams without first-round picks. They've mostly made power moves that are going to help them for next year, but still some more work to do. It's a PFF.